Hello, my name's Rod Yates, and you are listening to Humans of Music, a Jaxsta podcast. This is where I talk to music creators and industry professionals about their lives and careers, the ups and downs of their journey, and the lessons they've learned along the way. And my guest today is Best Coast frontwoman Bethany Cosentino. What does it take to find happiness? For Bethany Cosentino, it had a lot to do with getting sober. She spent much of her 20s self-medicating as she dealt with mental health issues and the sudden success of the band's debut album, Crazy For You. It wasn't really working though. As she sings in the song Everything Has Changed off the band's latest album, Always Tomorrow, I used to drink nothing but water and whiskey. Now I think those were the reasons why I used to fall deep down in a hole. The chorus to that song, however, is Everything Has Changed, I Like It This Way. And it's the optimism and self-realization in that sentiment that drives much of Always Tomorrow. In this interview, Bethany talks about getting sober and the events leading up to that, and she also talks about her journey from an attention-loving kid doing TV commercials to high school dropout playing clubs around LA, and how she navigated her way to Best Coast. I spoke with Bethany at the Big Sound Music Conference in Brisbane in late 2019, where she delivered the keynote address a day earlier. At that point, she'd only just finished making Always Tomorrow, so we don't talk specifically about the album, but a lot of what we do cover really informs the record. Now, I once read a quote of Bethany's where she told an interviewer that this job, being in a band, had pretty much saved her life. And we start the conversation by talking about just how it did that.
It's helped me feel like I've been able to carve out almost like a purpose, you know? And I think that's like that's the big existential crisis of life, right? Is like, what are we doing here? And like, why are we here? And what happens after we go? And like, sort of creating this like game plan for yourself while you're on Earth, you know? And I think for me, it's like, this job has given me, it has definitely made me feel like a sense of purpose, and it's given me a place to channel all of those things, like my anxiety and my depression and the things that I've gone through my whole life. It's given me an outlet to discuss that stuff. And it's also like it's created rather like a community for people that relate to it. When I was just doing this interview before I came here, there was a girl that worked at the record store who asked me to sign her copy of Crazy For You. And she was like, this record really like saved my life as a young teenage girl. And I think it's like that to me is so cool, that anything that I created out of my own pain or my own, you know, dilemmas of existence have helped other people. So I think ultimately like it's given me a purpose, and it's made me really feel like, oh yeah, this is what life is all about, is just like working through these things and creating something for somebody to connect to.
Is there a pressure that comes with that? I mean, when you were writing Crazy For You, you probably weren't thinking, well, this might save the life of a girl in Brisbane. But now you've been made aware of the power of your music. Does that play into your songwriting at all?
I don't think it really, probably like subconsciously it does, but I don't really ever, I'm not one of those writers that like when I sit down, I say like, okay, I'm going to write about this thing and I want to say it in this way. Like the way in which I write is just very like natural, and it just kind of happens. And so I think like whatever it is I might be going through, or whatever it is I might feel like I have on my mind to say at that moment, it kind of comes out. And then I think I leave it open enough that it's available for interpretation by anybody, you know? And so I wouldn't say that there's pressure behind that, but it definitely is sometimes. It's more just kind of like mind blowing that I'm like I walked away from that interaction and I was just like, that's so crazy. Like my life is just so crazy. It's so crazy that this is like, that this happened, because I had no plan for this to be what happened. You know, there's some musicians that are like, I just knew and I knew and I knew it would be music as my career. And I was always kind of just like, I don't know, like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. So it's cool that it ended up being this, but it still blows my mind sometimes when, like you said, there's a girl in Brisbane and I don't live anywhere near here who's saying like, these songs got me through high school. I'm like, oh, that's so crazy.
I mean, when you were in high school, you were diagnosed with bipolar, anxiety, ADHD, and depression. What was it like to receive those diagnoses?
I mean, at the time I was like, so I just didn't really ever have real coping skills. Like I just never knew how to handle life and what life threw at me. And so I remember like when I first started going to like therapy and, first time I saw a psychiatrist, like explaining the way that I felt. And it was almost like a relief to understand that there was like something to call this, and there was something to, there was like almost just it gave me just a feeling of like, oh, okay, well now I understand like what's going on, And I would say that like throughout the years, like I've learned how to manage a lot of that stuff, and I don't really feel like I'm bipolar, and I don't really feel like I have anxiety or depression anymore. Like I feel like I've learned how to have a better grasp at life. And I think back then, especially as a teenager, like I just didn't like, I would like be late to school and I'd be like, the world's ending, and now it's like the world's not ending until the world is actually ending.
Right. How did it affect your behavior growing up?
I was a wild kid for sure. Like I partied a lot and I was very rebellious and I didn't ever go to school and I would lie to my parents all the time. Like I was kind of a bad girl, but I'm also an only child. And so that I think was interesting because there was nobody to like bounce anything off of. It was like just me and my parents. And my parents got divorced when I was like 15. And that was really hard for me because I didn't know anything different. My parents had like a complicated relationship, but I only knew them as being my parents together as a unit. And so when they split, it was really hard for me, and I didn't really understand like, what my life was going to look like. I was like, what do you mean I have to now go see my dad in some other place? And I was just like, I shut down like pretty hardcore. I was just like, I don't want to do this. And I dropped out of high school. I got pretty into partying. And yeah, like I just didn't know how to like live life at all. Like I was just like going through the motions and just doing the things that I heard you were supposed to do.
And when did that change for you? Like when did you actually develop those tools?
I honestly don't feel like I learned how to live life not going through the motions until like about like a year and a half ago, honestly. Like I feel like my teen years were crazy. My 20s were just such a like blur, and it was like the peak of my career was in like my early 20s, and I was partying and I was traveling and I was just doing everything. And then everything kind of slowed down once I hit my 30s. I just kind of was like, okay, I don't really want to do this anymore, and I want to like try to like have a better grasp at life and how to do this. And so I started going to therapy. Well, back to therapy. I've gone to therapy 100 million times, but I actually stuck with it this time. I got sober. I was just like really reached a point where I was just like, I can't keep doing life this way. It's not enjoyable. But of course it's like I said this yesterday in my keynote, like I'm a human. So of course I wake up and there are some days where I just revert back to that feeling of like, ugh, like what does it all mean? And how am I going to do this? But I think now I'm better equipped to like handle those things because like I said, it's not the end of the world until it's the end of the world. And I think it's so easy for us to assume like, this is it. This is the worst case scenario when most of the time it isn't.
So how do you talk yourself down?
I think I just like acceptance. That's like a huge part of it is just accepting like what is actually happening. I do a lot of like, I think body scans are really helpful. Like for anxiety, like when you literally just you try to just be present and like examine like what you're feeling in your body, and you'll say, like, okay, I'm outside. I can feel the wind on me. I can feel the sun on me. I can feel my fingernails, like just kind of bringing myself into the now and the present, because I think that is really the only way that I can stay anxiety free is when I'm focused on exactly what is happening in this moment and not projecting to like later on in the day or what happened later or what happened earlier rather.
Have you found yourself in public situations, like whether you're performing on stage, where you've had to do that, where you've had to catch yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Like yesterday, even doing the keynote, there were moments where I was like, am I saying too much? Am I talking too fast? Like, and I would just kind of like stop myself and be like, you're fine. Like you're fine. There's people here, you know, you're totally fine. And I think it's just like, we don't really know what our minds are capable of, and our minds are capable of taking us, because you know, the reality of it is it's like we're animals, so we have our brains are literally like created to save us from like conflict, you know? So it's like our brain automatically goes to that place of like, okay, like fight or flight, and it's like it's up to us to take that and like harness it and be like, okay, relax. Like that's one of the big things I've learned in therapy, because the type of therapy I do is called cognitive behavioral therapy. So it kind of like retrains you to stop yourself in those sort of situations and to stop that like natural animal brain that's like, oh, I have to defend myself here. You know, it's like I can catch that now and be like, okay, like scale of 1 to 10, this is a 2. It's not that big of a deal. Like take a deep breath and keep going. So, yeah, on stage, I feel like performing and being on stage is the number one place where you have to be present and in the moment, because it's literally all you're doing, you know? Like all I can focus on in that moment is like, are my fingers hitting the right chords? Am I saying the right lyrics? Am I going to trip over anything? Like it's just me and the stage and that moment. So that actually is a really easy place to be present.
So in terms of where you grew up, so you grew up in California. Whereabouts specifically was that?
I grew up in this little suburb called La Crescenta, which is in Glendale. Which is just like in the foothills, like the mountains up just a little bit outside of LA County.
Okay. And when you think, I mean, everything you were saying before about what you were like as a kid, I mean, when you think of your upbringing, what springs to mind?
I had a really good childhood, honestly. Like I had really loving, wonderful, caring parents that did the best that they could. And I was exposed to really wonderful people. I have my best friend from that time period is still my best friend. She's basically like my sister at this point. I had a really good, like I just had a good upbringing. I think that I just kind of created the drama for myself. But I grew up in like a really not like a small town, but I grew up in like a very suburban, everybody played sports and everybody's parents were married, and it was very like a lot of normalcy. And I was always kind of like the black sheep. Like I played sports, but I quit when I got into high school because I got into music, and I was like, I don't want to play sports. I want to go to punk shows. And
right.
So I felt like a bit of a black sheep where I grew up. But it's interesting because now that area is very like hip and cool, and there's a lot of like, you know, alternative people that live there now. And it's so funny that it's become that, because it definitely wasn't when I was growing up.
Okay. And what drew you to punk music? Because I think you went to like, you like TSOL, for example, and the Weirdos and the Germs. Like what was it about that music that really...
I think it was just like seeing people really get to be themselves and just not really giving a shit what anybody thought, because that was very much my MO at that time. Like I was like, I don't care what you think about me, even though I desperately did care. Like I liked to pretend that I didn't. But there was this record store called Tempo Music on the main drag of where I grew up, and there was like this really cute punk boy that worked there, and he would put out his recommended records, and my best friend Jessica and I would go, and we would always just like buy whatever he put out. And he would always put out, you know, like whether it was like Descendants or Husker Du or Blink-182, we like learned about from him. All these like Epitaph compilations, Punkorama, like that was really like how I got into it. And I feel like when I got into it, it was just like I found like an outlet for just like middle finger to the world, because that was pretty much how I felt. Like I was just like, I don't like people telling me what to do. I don't like having to dress a certain way. Like I just want to be myself, and punk music really like allowed you to do that.
And is that around the time of your parents' divorce? Was that?
That was earlier. By the time my parents got divorced, I was like really into like Saddle Creek Records and like emo, and I went through like every phase you could go through. I was like punk, I was into hardcore, I was into like emo. I was into like super into indie. Like had like a crazy like pop phase where like Hanson was my favorite band. Like I've done every like subculture you can do.
Okay. And it's all informed who you are.
Yeah, exactly.
So was your mum an actor?
My mom did like commercials when I was a kid. She did like a handful of commercials, but she wasn't like a notable actor or anything.
Okay. But you started doing commercials for a little while as well. Is that right?
Yeah. I went, the way the story goes is that I went with her once to her agency and they were like, oh, she's so cute. And my mom was like, oh yeah, she's really like performative and kind of a loudmouth. And they were like, well, have you ever thought of putting her in commercials? And my mom was like, no. And then I think I maybe voiced it to her, like, I want to do this. Like, I want to do what you do. And she was just like, all right, well. And so I was the only kid signed to the agency. Like my parents were always made that a really big deal. They were like, they made an exception for you. You were the only child. But I did it. I did like a handful of commercials and then I just got over it because the hours were so crazy. Yeah. Like I would be on set from like 6 o'clock in the morning to like 10 p.m., obviously with breaks in between and stuff. But like, it was just crazy. And I think
how old are you at this
I
point?
was like 7, it's like 6 or 7.
Okay.
And I might've even been younger. No, I want to say I was like 6 or 7, but I just didn't, anything that like required that much time away from like my friends and playing with my Barbies and riding my bike. I was like, I don't want to do this. Right. So I just kind of stopped doing it.
Was it a world that, like, did you learn anything from that? I mean, were you too young to take away learnings from being in that environment and having to do that work?
Yeah, I think I was too young. I think the only thing I really feel like I learned from it is that I do think I'm good at like I try to like remain very humble, but I think that I feel like it's kind of undeniable that I have a large personality. And I think that that's one of the things that I used to be really insecure about. Like I would be very much like, oh, I'm doing too much or I'm being too extra or like whatever. But I think now I'm just like, I think it's like, it's a positive thing in terms of business. And so I think at that age, I realized like, oh, I'm good at not necessarily acting, but I was good at like performing and kind of like commanding a room and being like a big presence. Right. And I think it took me a really long time to become comfortable with that because I was weirdly insecure about it.
But you were born with it by the sounds of things from a young age.
Apparently. I was apparently singing before I could talk and acting, doing like one-woman shows. And yeah, my poor parents, shows. I was such a handful.
What's a one-woman show? At
just
the age
like,
of
I
5?
guess I was just like writing these little plays and I would like storm into the room and I'd put on like a blanket and I would start singing like Little Mermaid song or I don't know. I was like out the womb, just very like, here I am.
And in terms of singing, so you sang in the church.
Yeah.
You sang at school. Mm-hmm. So singing was something that you identified with quite early on. And it felt good?
Yeah, I loved it. Like it was like, because like I said, I was super, super awkward and insecure, like in my early, like, age, like 10, like 9, 10, 11, 12. I don't feel like it until I was like maybe 17 or 18 that I started to feel a bit more like comfortable who I was. But I was always like really, really awkward and like kind of a dork and just like didn't really like, I had friends, but I didn't really ever feel like I connected. And music and singing was the one thing that when I would do it, I felt so strong. And I just felt like I could stand on a stage and sing in front of a bunch of people and I wasn't nervous and I didn't feel uncomfortable and I didn't feel like I just knew that was the thing that I was like good at doing. It was the only thing that really made me feel comfortable was singing.
After the break, Bethany talks about playing the LA club scene as a teenager and why she refers to her 20s as a disaster. Welcome back to Humans of Music and my interview with Bethany Cosentino. Bethany was 13 when her dad gave her a guitar, and she started taking lessons learning songs by bands like Blink-182 and Bad Religion. Within a few years, she was writing her own music and gigging in LA, although she got her first taste of playing live a few years earlier, which is where we pick up the conversation. And did you perform with your dad, like at the Rusty Pelican? Is there a venue where...
Yeah, there was this place called the Rusty Pelican that my dad's a musician, and my dad would play there, and I would go and I would like just get up and like sit in, and I would like sing a song. And the way he explains it is that he'd be like, you like brought the house down. You'd get up and you would sing, and everyone was like so blown away because you were this little like curly haired girl, and you would get up there and sing, and everybody was like, wow. So again, very performative from a very young age. I had no problems walking into a room and being like, here I am, watch me. But if it came to like boys or things like that, I was so uncomfortable and awkward. But put me in front of a bunch of people, no fear.
Right. And because you started playing in LA around the age of 14, is that right? You started writing songs?
I don't really remember how old I was when I played my first show, but like I started writing songs, and then I would just like, I remember like I was like, because I dropped out of high school in my second year of high school, I think. So I must have been like 16. And that was around the time that I was like, I think I just want to play music. And I didn't really know what that meant or what that looked like. But I would, I like realized that you could play shows at like the Whiskey, the Whiskey A Go-Go, like if you paid to play, like you could like buy tickets and then you had to sell them. So I like reached out and I was like, hi, I'm I'm a singer-songwriter and I want to play this show. And I must have been like 17 or 18. And they were like, well, okay, you come in and you basically, you pay for the tickets, and then it's up to you to sell them. Whenever you don't sell, you have to pay us. And I remember being like, this is stupid. Like, what a stupid concept. But I like did it. I sold all the tickets, and my dad played in the band. He played drums for me in the band. And, like the band that played before me was like a hair metal band, and it made no sense. But that was like the first show I ever played. And then I just like, I didn't know how to play shows then. So I just did that. And then I played a show at this place called the Hotel Cafe, which I don't remember how that show happened. But that was the show where a woman came up to me from, I don't remember what record label it was, but she was from a major label, and she handed me a business card, and she was like, I'd love to talk to you about, we'd love to have you come in for a meeting. You're very talented. And I was just like, no, like I'm not interested in that. 'Cause again, I was very into punk. And I had that very middle finger to the world attitude. And I was like, I already know what you're going to try to do. You're going to try to make me a pop star. And that's not what I want to be. So I think I like emailed her and maybe talked to her like a couple of times. And then I just probably ghosted her or something. I just didn't care.
That is really ballsy for a high school dropout. Just to go, yeah, I'm not interested in your major label deal.
Yeah. I mean, I did some ballsy ass shit at that age for sure. I was just like, that's what I'm saying. It was just like there was no risk in anything. Like I was just like, whatever. I would get hired at a bookstore or wherever I was working, and I just wouldn't show up. I would just straight up be like, I'm not going to call, and I'm just not going to go in, and I wouldn't go. And then they'd be calling me like, where are you? And I would just be like, I don't work there anymore. Like I just used to do crazy shit like that.
Didn't anyone tell you I don't work there anymore?
Then I'd like ask my mom, I'd be like, can you call and quit this job for me? And she'd be like, okay. 'Cause obviously there are like codependency issues there that we've worked through. But the only child thing really can mess you up. Being an only child can definitely mess you up.
Really?
I think so. Yeah.
I have an only child.
Oh, do you?
Give me some tips.
I mean, I think it's really left up to them to sort of, how you navigate it. But it's hard because you're the only kid. You're the only one. And there's like nobody to bounce things off of. And I think that, for me at least, like my parents sort of were really... They did the best they could, but there was a lot of like using me as this weird like therapist. And I was like, that's not my role. I'm a kid,
Yeah.
And I think that I took a lot of the parenting on sometimes. And my parents are the best. I love them both to death, but they know this. Like I've told them before, I'm like, you guys would put me in the middle of some weird shit that I shouldn't have been in the middle of. I was a child, But I think that I think that like when you're an only child, you really learn how to like be independent in a way that like kids with siblings don't ever learn. Because like I had like imaginary friends and I had that whole thing because I was just like, it's just me. I don't have anybody to hang out with. If it wasn't like my friend or my cousin, you know, I didn't have anybody else at the house. But I don't know. I think every only child, whenever I meet another only child, I'm like, you get it. It's like this psychic connection that we have.
Right. Did it give you a kind of resilience, or that the fact that you had to rely on yourself? Did that help you, or has that helped you throughout your career?
I think so. I mean, it's funny. I don't really think I did ever really like fully rely on myself, because I really had, my mom helped me with everything. I mean, like me saying my mom quit jobs for me, like that 100% happened. Like I would literally be like, Mom, I don't know how to do this. And she'd be like, okay, let me help you. I think though that the only child thing of like spending a lot of time by myself just as a kid, I'm making myself sound like I was some like really sad, like pathetic loner. I wasn't, but I did like spend a lot of time alone. And I think that in itself has helped me in this job, because this job is like really, even though you're around people a lot, like it's very isolating.
Sure.
It's very isolating, especially being on the road. Like you could be, you know, on tour, like I'm on a tour bus with like 7 people, but there are times where I feel super isolated and by myself, you know, even though I'm sitting next to somebody, I feel very like, okay, I'm just like out here in the middle of the country in this random place, and it's hard to feel connected at times. So I think that I learned, you know, like I did that when I was a kid a lot. So I feel like that kind of taught me the powering through kind of element. I think I learned a bit as a kid.
Do you remember your first ever tour?
The first tour we did was Bob and I.
Doesn't have to be Best Coast either. Could be Pocahontas,
well, that
or
was
just.
Well, that was really well. I guess I toured with Pocahontas, but I don't really remember it. I mean, we did like an East Coast tour. I was moving to New York, and so we kind of booked a tour around that. Like I went out to New York like maybe a month early, and we did like a 2-week tour or something up the coast with Woods, the band Woods. Which was cool. But I remember like I didn't like it because I was like, this is so hard. Like you just sit in a car all day. You live out of a suitcase. At that time we were like sleeping on people's floors and like showering at strangers' houses and sometimes not getting a shower at all. And I was like, this is the element of punk that I'm not cool with.
Yeah.
The like sleeping on the ground, washing my face in the gas station bathroom. Like that's the part of punk that I'm like, I don't subscribe to that part. I'm a bit of a like, I like my things to be clean and neat and to like sleep in a bed and, you know.
So that's presumably one of the things that you learnt from your time in Pocahontas, how you wanted to tour and.
Yeah. I mean, I think I also like that band taught me, that was kind of my first taste of like playing live shows, like, you know, bigger shows and touring and things like that. But it was also like not the kind of music I wanted to be making. Like I was a songwriter. Like I wanted to write songs and I wanted to like say things. And that band was very like experimental and weird. And, you know, it was a good outlet for me at the time. Like it was a good creative outlet. But I think it really ultimately made me realize like I don't want to do the like artsy, like, you know, that realm, the experimental world like wasn't for me. And I think that's ultimately like what drove me to do the complete opposite, which was like, you know, a pop rock band with like very like upbeat, sunny melodies. Like I went the complete polar opposite, you know.
And did that, what you were talking about before with the touring, did you enter Best Coast thinking, all right, so that's, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want that part of.
I mean, no, because I did that in Best Coast for a while. Like the first tour we ever did in Best Coast, we toured with the Vivian Girls, and they Bob and I didn't have a drummer at the time. So Allie, who was the drummer in Vivian Girls, drummed for us. So she would play for us and play for them. And then later on down the line, she ended up leaving Vivian Girls and joining Best Coast full time and playing drums with us. But that tour was like super punk. And we were like sleeping on people's floors and we were in a van all day. And I did that world of touring in Best Coast for like a good solid chunk of time. But I think it was like, I didn't enjoy it per se, but I didn't hate it as much as I did in the Pocahontas days because I at least liked the music that I was playing. And I think when I was doing Pocahontas World, I was like, this is so not my scene that it was a little bit like frustrating to sleep on someone's floor because I was like, cool, now I have to go play this basement show and do this like 30-minute freak out set of music that I don't even like doing. With Best Coast, it was like if we were playing some really seedy like bar club, like it was fun because it was like I got to play my music and sing my songs about the shit that I wanted to say, and people responded to that, and therefore I enjoyed it.
I think I read a quote with you where you were talking about the melodies which you write were almost a way of telling yourself that it's going to be okay. You had these bright melodies with this dark subject matter. Did it really have that effect on you when you were writing these songs?
I don't know. That's a very like deep thing for me to say because I'm like, I don't know that I necessarily like intentionally write these melodies to trick myself into thinking everything's okay. I think it's just like where my head is at as far as inspiration wise for writing. I think it just veers to that place of like upbeat, happy, sunny. When you're writing music in a place where you look outside and it's blue skies and it's palm trees and, you know, sunflowers and like when that's the landscape, it's hard to write a song that sounds like, you know, dark and sad and like slow, you know? And so I think that is sort of where that comes from. But I do also think it's like that was the thing that I really enjoyed doing because it was like, it's kind of easier to like talk about that kind of stuff when it's put to this, when the palette is kind of this, you know, like joyful feeling thing, you know? If you're listening, and I mean, listen, there's a reason why like artists like Lana Del Rey are so successful. When you're making like bummer music that sounds like a bummer, it's cool. There is a time and a place for that. But I don't always want to listen to music that makes me feel like super depressed. You know, like sometimes I want to listen to stuff that's just like, this makes me feel good. And then if you kind of like deeper listen, like, oh, wait, but these lyrics aren't really happy, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it might just be a combination of like, the landscape and then just the reality of life is like those woes, those just like come out of me when I write because I use writing as a form of therapy, I think.
Yeah. So when you think about those, I guess that chunk of time where you're doing these tours and you're sleeping on floors and then when Crazy For You comes out and is on the Billboard charts and is doing well and all of a sudden you're in demand and people want to talk to you, and I think you mentioned yesterday Rolling Stone are doing a feature on you. What's going on in your head?
Nothing. Like nothing of like concrete meaning. Like I was just so confused. Like I was just like, I couldn't make out my thoughts. I was just like, what is this? Like I was obviously very excited and I was very like, this rules, but I was also just like, I didn't know how to comprehend what was happening at all. It was just like, it happened so fast and it was so intense because my life was all of a sudden projected in this spotlight, you know, on like a minuscule level compared to like, you know, like Billie Eilish or huge artists in the world. But it was like enough for me to be like, whoa, this is crazy. And I think like, you know, it was difficult for me to be like in gratitude of that because I just didn't really understand. Like I was so just frustrated at people criticizing me. I was frustrated at people asking me personal questions. I didn't have a filter, so I was always sharing things. And then I'd be like, why is that the headline? And it's like, well, when you talk about doing cocaine with strippers, of course they're going to use that as the headline. Like, that's your fault for saying that, you know? So I think it's like, it was just such a crazy blur. It still is a crazy blur. Like, there are moments that I'll see a photo, or, you know, Instagram has that thing where it'll like, you can click on it and it's like, you know, 5 years ago today, and it'll show you the post. I look at that sometimes and I'm like, what the hell? I don't remember that. Or that was 10 years ago, or that was 5 years ago. Like, it's just crazy, the things that have happened since that record came out.
And I thought it was interesting yesterday that you said your 20s were a disaster. Whereas, you know, from the outside, you look at someone who has a successful music career, too, as the world.
Yeah.
Why were they a disaster?
I think personally they were a disaster. I don't regret any of the things that happened or any of the decisions that I made, because ultimately it all got me exactly where I am today. But I do think it was just like, there was a lot of pretending, and there was a lot of like me acting like I'm fine, I've got this, I'm good, and not actually like asking for help. And I think like it was just really hard for me to accept like what my life had become. And so instead of accepting it, I just tried to like get rid of it. And that was really like where when I got really into like drinking and drugs and stuff like that, because I was just like, this is a really easy way for me to just numb this all, is just to like make it go away. But then of course you wake up the next day and you're like, oh, it's still there. And then the next day it's still there. It's still there. It's still there. And it wasn't until I decided to get sober that I was like, I am sick of doing this every day, you know? So I think it's like, I wouldn't say my like life was a disaster, but emotionally I felt very disastrous. Like, it was very hard for me to wake up in the morning.
Yeah. And how have you taken to it?
Honestly, it's the best thing I've ever done. I feel like a different person. I feel like my whole life was a series of events of me just trying to, like I said, figure out how to just go through the motions. And now I don't feel like that anymore. I wake up every day and I'm just like happy to be here. And I'm like, you know, like I can look at my life and I can go through and make checklists of things that I'm like, wow, this is so awesome. Like when I got here, when I got here to Brisbane, I like, you know, got to my hotel and I walked in and there was like this huge like jacuzzi tub in the bathroom. And I was so tired from the flight. And I went, I like drew myself a bath and there's like, you know, like bath salts and candles. And I was like, okay, I need this. And I like got in the bathtub and I was like, just looked around and I was like, look at your life. Like, look at where it's brought you. It's so cool that all of this shit that I've gone through and all of these things that I've done have brought me to this place. It's just so rad because a lot of people don't get to ever experience that. And I'm really lucky that I like had that awakening of just like, something's got to give, I've got to change, because now I can actually appreciate those things, you know?
And
like,
there's gratitude by the sounds.
Exactly. Yeah. Like a couple of years ago, I don't know if I would have come and done this because I don't know if I would have had it in me. Like I would have maybe been like, yeah, sure. And then I probably would have been here. Oh, I'm so jet lagged. I'm so tired. I'm so this. And I don't want to do all this press and blah, blah, blah. Like it would have, but then I would have walked into the room. Hi, so nice to meet you, you know? And so it's nice to be like here and to be present and to be appreciative of the fact that like anybody gives a shit what I have to say and wants to talk to me, you know? And yes, I'm jet lagged and yes, I'm tired. And yes, I would like, have been moments that I've been here where I'm like, I would much rather be like on my couch with my dog. But at the same time, I'm like, this is so cool that I get to come here and do this. And that really all I think is thanks to sobriety, is that I'm able to just say like, I've been able to like clear through a lot of stuff and to like get to the place where I can just look at everything and be really like grateful for what I have.
Yeah, nice. Is sobriety something you've done yourself, or have you had someone to help you with it?
I mean, I like kind of just decided like I didn't want to do what I was doing anymore, and I have a lot of friends that are sober, and so I kind of reached out to them and they helped me through it. And you know, I've like I've discussed before, like I've been in therapy for several years, and that was really helpful in it too, because I think a lot of it was like kind of went hand in hand. Like giving up drugs and alcohol, I think also helped me let go of a lot of the past and things like that. But I think, I think that my relationships have really strengthened too, like with my friends that are also sober. Like I feel like we all look at our lives and we just go like, this is so cool that we get to do all the things we're doing, and to come from it with such a place of clarity is like really rad.
After the break, Bethany talks about the importance of authenticity in music and her experiences with sexism in the music industry. Welcome back to Humans of Music and my conversation with Bethany Cosentino. Earlier in the interview, Bethany talked about how in some ways her career just happened. She just kind of did it. But to get where she is today, she clearly had to make some key decisions, and we pick up the conversation talking about what they were.
I think always staying true to myself, I think, was really important. And I think, it's interesting because part of the reason why I was like, I don't have a problem like with drinking or, like with partying, like I don't have a problem, is because I was able to look at my life and I was like, I own a house. I have multiple records. Like I have money in the bank. I drive a nice car. Like I could look at those things and be like, my life is fine. I'm fine. I realized that all of those things don't matter at the end of the day. Like the thing that really matters is that I'm being my authentic self and that I'm able to wake up in the morning and like get out of bed and like go through with the day. And I think that at the end of the day, even when I was like messed up and struggling with a lot of different things, like I still had that part of me that was so committed to just like, this is who I am and this is the story that I have to tell, and I'm not going to bend, and you're not going to get, like, I'm very stubborn, and I was just like, I'm not going to change or be a version of me that anybody wants me to be. And I think ultimately like that is why people really connect to me and what I have to say, because I don't think that they see a person who's like acting or a person who's like pretending to be somebody that they're not. Even the days where I was walking into a room and going, hi, it's so nice to meet you. When in my brain, I was like, I'm so pissed that I even have to be here. Like that side of me would come out sometimes. Like I would do interviews sometimes and just say like, I don't know what you want me to say. Like I was just myself. And I think at the end of the day, like that is really the thing that has afforded me this 10-year-long career, is that I've just been authentically myself through and through, and I'm not willing to compromise that. Even still, like I'm just like not willing to not be myself. Yeah. It's just like doesn't seem interesting to me.
It's important too. And I think you're right. I think people see through that.
Yeah.
I think I read something where you were talking about sometimes when you give career advice to people, and one of the things you said was don't really try, just do it. Mm-hmm. Is that
it's such a like vague thing, but I mean, honestly, that's what worked for me. And it's really hard to say that, like, don't try, just do it. It's like, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but I'm a total believer in like things happen for a reason, and what is meant to be will be. And those are such cheesy, cliche things to say, but it's like, it's so true. Like you look at your life and you look at the series of people that you meet and the places that you go and the decisions that you make, and those things all ultimately alter the reality of like your life, you know? And I think it's like, if you're meant to be successful and you're meant to be, whatever that definition of success is to you, like if it's meant to be for you, like it will be. And I think it's up to you, like how you define that. I have a lot of friends that do music that, they want it to be like their job. And I'll just kind of say to them, like, listen, like, you're not ultimately in control of that. Like, you're either going to put out a record and people are going to really like it, or you're going to, like, play shows and people are going to come, or you're going to drive yourself insane trying to make yourself the biggest artist you can with no real, like, I'm blanking on the word, but, like, it's like, it's just that thing. It's like setting realistic expectations, I think is very important.
Did you have that? Or did you want to be in this position you're in now?
No, I had zero expectations. Like I knew that I wanted I knew that I was like, I want to have a band and I want that to be my job. Like I had made that decision where I was like, all right, I just want to play music. Like I don't ever want to work in an office. I don't ever want to work in retail. I don't ever want to go back to school. There were like those decisions that I had made, but I didn't seek that out. Like I didn't start this band thinking like, this is going to be the thing that bails me out. Like I just did it. And then I think just like I said, remaining authentic and true to myself while also like working my ass off, I think is ultimately like what got me here. Right. But I just think that, you know, you hear these stories of like people that are like, I showed up to every record label with my demo and I just tried to bang down the door of every person and it just, you know, like it never happened for me. And then one day it happened. It's just like, that's that person's story, you know, and everybody's is different. But I just totally believe that like if you try too hard, you're going to drive yourself crazy because you're not in control of the outcome of that. So it's like, I think the best thing to do is just have the realistic expectation that like this could go one way or it could go another way. And I'm just happy with whatever happens. And I think that's ultimately like what we all have to like get on the same page with this, you know.
And so that was some of the career advice that you've given people. What about career advice that people have given you? Have you sought anyone out? Has there been a mentor or anyone that you've talked to?
Not really. I mean, I think I've been given advice by like some of the people, you know, that I've worked with and some of the other artists that we've toured with and things. But I think it's like really the thing that everybody says is just like do your own thing and just be open and honest and remain true to who you are and don't compromise your integrity. And I think that's such a huge part of it is like not being willing to change, not being willing to like bend on my artistic integrity. You know, I think that is like a huge thing that, you know, that it goes back to like the woman handing me the business card, like at the show when I was 16 or however old, like I was just like, no, I'm not going to conform to your Miley Cyrus agenda pop star. Like that's not what I wanted to do. And I think that that is ultimately like what I still do, you know, like we just made this record. There were definitely moments where, you know, A&R and people involved in the process were like, well, you know, we think maybe this would be a good idea or it sounds, and I was just like, no, I'm not interested in that. Like, thank you for your opinion, but I'm not willing to change who I am as an artist to sell more records.
Right.
I'm just not. Like, I'm down to take to like hear you out, but I can't promise you I'm going to take the advice because ultimately at the end of the day, if I have to get on stage and play a song that I hate because I listened to some label person who told me this is the thing that's going to make you Miley Cyrus huge, I would hate it. I would be like, this is the worst thing in the world that I have to play this like artificial thing that I just like sold my soul to so that I could like make a shitload of money. It's like, I like money and I like success, but I'm also not willing to like go the distance that some people go. Right. So I think that's probably the best advice I've ever been given is just like, keep your artistic integrity, stay true to who you are, and, you know, only be willing to bend a little bit.
Right. I mean, you've been doing this long enough now where people respect you for that. There must have been times, particularly early on in your career, where you weren't afforded that respect, where you still had the fact that I'm not going to bend, like this is my artistic integrity, but presumably there were people who didn't respect that. Did you have to fight in the early days for that?
Not really, honestly. Like, I don't really feel like in the beginning there was a lot of pushback because we like came from such a boutique, like indie world. It was never really like, there was never like an A&R person in the room. We never had an A&R person until recently. So it was never like, there was never really anybody that was saying like, you should do it this way. There was definitely like, our old manager would definitely tell me like, you shouldn't like talk that way. You should be nicer on stage and you should do these things. And I just, you know, at that time I was like, you can go fuck yourself. I'm not going to listen to you. Like, I'm going to do what I do. So I would say that there was like definitely like moments where someone would offer me advice and I would just kind of like hit their hand away. But I think that that a lot of that had to do too with just like the like frame of mind I was in. But I don't really feel like anybody ever tried to like mold me into somebody else. I think everybody's always kind of maybe just tried to like clean up the edges a little bit and just been like, here's how you can like still be yourself, but also not appear to be such an asshole.
So I think 2020 is 10 years since Crazy for You. Is
10 years, yeah.
Do you still recognize the woman who wrote that record?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like, I can look at those songs and I can like hear it and I'm like, wow, like it's crazy that was me, you know? But I definitely feel like, I mean, I'm not acting like I'm some like brand new like person. Like I've changed a lot and I'm definitely a different person, but I still have the like angsty like parts of me, and I still have the parts of me that get very like frustrated and like, you know, like I said, wake up some days and I'm just like, ugh, I just don't want to do this. But so I think like there definitely is still like I listen to that record and those songs and I can still connect and I can still remember what it felt like to feel the way that I did when I was writing those songs and singing those lyrics. But I'm like proud of that girl, you know. I look at it and I'm like, it was crazy. My life was really crazy, and it makes a lot of sense that like I used the word crazy in so many songs back then because it was nuts. It was really crazy what was going on for me. So I think, yeah, like I definitely still remember that girl, and I can look at her and I have a lot of compassion for her because I really remember like I didn't know what I was doing and I didn't know how to handle it all. And so I can look at it now and just be like, you know, hand over my heart, like, aw, little sweet Beth.
Right. And one thing I'm sure you get asked about a lot is the Lenny letter, which you wrote in 2016 about sexism in the music industry. Were you ever put in a position where you felt unsafe in the music industry as a result of sexism?
I mean, I wouldn't say like unsafe, but I definitely had moments where I just knew that certain things were happening to me because of my gender, and people were talking down to me or treating me differently than the men in my band. Like I've experienced, you know, whether it's like a